Lawyers. How did a greedy executor hide a will and get exposed at the worst possible moment? Story 1. I represented the deceased's estranged daughter, who was certain her late father had updated his will before dying of cancer. The executor, his cousin Roy, claimed the only valid will left everything to him, citing years of loyal care. My client was skeptical since her father had reached out to her 6 months before he died and had begun repairing their relationship. We subpoenaed the care home staff. One nurse casually mentioned helping the man scan documents for his lawyer 2 months before his death. That gave me an idea. We checked the man's email records via court order, and there it was, a PDF of a newer will sent to Roy. In it, my client was clearly listed as the primary heir. When we confronted Roy during the hearing, his face drained of all color. He tried to stammer some nonsense about not realizing it was official, but the metadata showed he'd opened the document 5 times, once even 2 days after the funeral. The judge ordered the estate transferred to my client and sanctioned Roy for fraud. He ended up being the one cut off for life. Story 2. The executor was a slick-talking real estate agent named Dean, who'd convinced the whole family he was just carrying out Aunt Lydia's wishes. The original will, years old, left everything to him. But Lydia had been lucid just months before dying, and everyone suspected she had rewritten her will. The turning point came when Dean tried to quickly sell Lydia's old home before probate even cleared. That's when my client, Lydia's niece, hired me. We dug through Lydia's email and couldn't find much, but we subpoenaed her notary records, and bingo. A second will was signed and notarized 2 months before she passed. It left the estate to a local animal rescue and her nieces. Dean claimed he'd never seen it, but the notary testified that Dean had been present when Lydia asked her to notarize it. He even drove her there. He'd shredded the original copy. The judge ruled not only that the second will was valid, but also that Dean committed intentional fraud. He lost his license, was fined, and the Rescue Foundation publicly thanked our team on TV. Dean's face was in the background, red as a tomato. Story 3. The executor, Margot, the deceased's sister, hid the will in plain sight. She submitted a copy that just happened to exclude the deceased's longtime caretaker, who had lived with her for 10 years. My client was that caretaker. She was devastated, certain the real will included her. No one else had seen the original. Margot insisted the deceased never got around to signing another will, and that the one she had was all there was. 2 days before court, a neighbor brought me an envelope. Inside was a flash drive the deceased had handed him, just in case. On it was a video, recorded 2 weeks before her death. In it, she clearly stated she was disinheriting Margot and leaving her estate to her caretaker. She even held up the new signed and dated will to the camera. In court, I played the video. Margot's jaw hit the floor. The judge not only admitted the new will, but referred the case for criminal investigation. Margot sobbed in the hallway, but never apologized. Story 4. We were halfway through probate when I noticed the signatures on the will looked off. The document gave the deceased's nephew everything, millions in property, and excluded his own 2 children. I represented the older son, who'd been cut off suddenly after a mysterious change of heart. The nephew, Trevor, was the executor. He was arrogant and dismissive, but couldn't answer basic questions about when or where the will was signed. We subpoenaed the 2 witnesses. One had died. The other was a retirement home janitor who, when brought to court, said under oath, "Oh yeah, I signed that paper Trevor gave me. But I never saw no old man." Boom. The judge paused proceedings. Forensics confirmed the signature was traced. Trevor turned pale. After an emergency hearing, the court invalidated the will. A search of his apartment revealed a shredded version of the legitimate will, which left the estate to the children. Trevor's inheritance? Nothing. And charges pending. Story 5. It was supposed to be a quiet family mediation. The executor, Linda, was the youngest daughter and had been in charge of everything since her mom passed. The will she brought forward was short, vague, and conveniently made her the sole heir of the estate, including a lakefront cabin everyone assumed would be shared. But her older brother, my client, remembered their mother mentioning updated paperwork. We had no leads until his teenage daughter pulled a receipt from the glove box of their mom's old car. It was from a UPS store, copy and notary services, dated just 3 weeks before she died. We subpoenaed the store's security footage. It showed the mother there with a man, Linda's ex-husband, getting a will notarized. The notary remembered them. The footage matched. In court, Linda tried to discredit the video, saying her mom was confused, but the footage showed her speaking clearly, confirming who gets what. The will left the cabin to all 3 children, equally. Linda's case crumbled. She stormed out in tears as the judge ruled the notary-verified will as valid. Her siblings never spoke to her again. Story 6. I was in court representing the daughter of a wealthy woman who passed unexpectedly. The executor was her second husband, Alan, who claimed the only will was the one from before the marriage. Surprise, it left everything to him. My client remembered her mom drafting a new will after a cancer scare, where she openly talked about making sure her daughter and grandchildren were protected. But Alan swore no such document existed. The turning point? The family dog. The deceased had a habit of scanning important documents and saving them under her dog's Buddy. We searched her laptop and found a folder labeled Buddy's Vet Records. Inside was the new will, PDF, signed, dated, witnessed. It split the estate between the husband and daughter equally. Alan's face when we printed it in court was the stuff of legends. The judge admitted it immediately. Alan didn't just lose half the estate. He also got sued for attempting to conceal the will. He looked stunned, like he'd just been hit by a car. Buddy saved the day. Story 7. The will was hidden in the wall, literally. The deceased was a quirky old woman who didn't trust banks or digital stuff. Her nephew, the executor, brought forward a sloppy, handwritten note claiming the woman left everything to him. Her best friend, my client, was suspicious. She said the woman always spoke of donating to a local food pantry and had even joked that her real will is where no one would think to look. During probate, the house was being cleared out. Behind a loose panel in the guest room, workers found a sealed envelope labeled, My Real Will. Open in court if Ben tries to screw people over. Inside was a notarized typed will, leaving the estate to several charities and her lifelong friend. We presented it in court, complete with the envelope and photos of where it was hidden. The judge didn't even wait for closing statements. Ben turned red, then white, then muttered, She always hated me anyway, before storming out. Story 8. The deceased had 2 sons. One lived across the country and the other, Derek, lived 2 doors down. Derek also happened to be the executor and the first person to find the will. It named him sole heir and made no mention of his brother. But during our deposition, he made a mistake. When asked what day he found the will, he casually said, I opened his safe the morning after he passed. Problem? The safe had been changed 6 months earlier, and only the deceased and his accountant had the new code. That caught the judge's attention. We subpoenaed the accountant, who confirmed that the deceased had brought a sealed envelope labeled New Will, delivered to my attorney only. That envelope never made it. When questioned again, Derek cracked. He admitted to accidentally opening it and misplacing it in his garage. The court didn't buy the accident. The new will surfaced, dated, signed, and giving equal shares to both brothers. Derek was stripped of executor rights and referred for obstruction charges. Story 9. This was one of the strangest I've ever had. The executor, a church pastor named Milton, claimed the will had been destroyed by the deceased before death. He insisted the man wanted his assets donated to the church and had renounced worldly possessions. We had reason to believe otherwise. The deceased had a long-term partner, Eric, who had lived with him for over 15 years. They weren't married, but they owned property together. Eric swore the will left everything to him. I filed a motion to examine the deceased's safe deposit box, which had gone untouched since his death. Milton objected, claiming it had nothing relevant. Suspicious. We got access. Inside, a sealed envelope with 2 copies of the will, dated and notarized, leaving the estate to Eric, and a separate letter addressed to Milton. Do not open this. This is not yours. It took 2 minutes in court for the whole thing to unravel. Milton was removed. Eric broke down crying. And the judge reminded the court, stealing a will is still a crime. Story 10. The executor, Suzanne, was the stepmother. The deceased had 2 kids from a previous marriage and had divorced their mother amicably. He died suddenly in a motorcycle accident. Suzanne presented a will from 5 years ago, leaving her everything. His kids were shocked. They said he'd updated his will just months ago, including college funds and real estate for them. But no copy could be found. A week before the final hearing, Suzanne's house caught fire. Firefighters managed to save the office, and in the mess, they found a safe. Inside were several documents, including the updated will, still sealed in a law firm envelope. We brought in the arson report. Fire was started in the kitchen, far from the office. Suzanne claimed she forgot the new will was even in the house. The judge didn't buy it. The new will was validated. She lost almost everything, just enough left to avoid total ruin. Her relationship with the stepkids? Gone. She left court crying. Story 11. He was a small-town pharmacist, no kids, never married. But he loved his neighbors. I represented one of them, an elderly widow named Myra, who swore he promised to leave something to her and the others who looked after him. The executor? His distant cousin Alex, who hadn't visited in 15 years. He claimed there was no will, no files, no letters, no digital trail, just silence. But then someone remembered something odd. The pharmacist always gave Myra and the mailman holiday cards, each one weirdly heavier than a normal card. She had saved them. We opened last year's envelope. Inside the card, if Alex ever shows up pretending there's no will, check the back of the painting in the hallway. What? They raced back to his house. Behind the dusty painting was an envelope taped to the frame. Last will and testament, signed March 8th. He split everything among neighbors and left Alex $1, so you don't contest it. We submitted the whole thing. Alex tried to argue it was a joke. The judge read the card aloud in court and ruled in 15 minutes. Alex left humiliated. Myra cried tears of joy. Story 12. The executor, Thomas, was the deceased's brother. He stood in front of the family after the funeral and said, "Don't worry, the will's straightforward. He left it all to me for safekeeping." That should have been the red flag. My client was the deceased's fiancée, who had lived with him for 8 years. She was devastated, both by his death and the claim that she was left out. I requested probate records, and Thomas produced a blurry, unsigned copy of a will dated 5 years earlier. That was it. I knew something was off. Turns out the deceased had a habit of printing every major document he signed, twice. I tracked down his old office manager. She gave us a manila folder that had been dropped off at her place, just in case. Inside was the signed, notarized will from 3 months ago. It left everything to the fiancé and their dog's care fund. We filed it instantly. The judge not only threw out Thomas's claim, but berated him in open court for gross misrepresentation. Thomas went pale. He wasn't just disinherited. He got banned from serving as executor in any future estate case. Story 13. The deceased was my client's grandfather, and the executor was his youngest son, Uncle Wayne. Wayne insisted the will had been lost and that, as next of kin, everything just defaulted to him. But my client remembered her grandpa writing a new will and giving her mom a copy for backup. Only problem. Her mom had passed away a year earlier, and her house had since been cleared out. We tracked down the storage unit where her mom's things had been moved. After hours of digging through bins, we found it, taped inside a cookbook. Signed, notarized, and very clear. The estate was to be split between all 4 grandchildren. When confronted, Wayne's first words were, "I thought that was shredded years ago." In court, he tried to argue that the will was invalid due to mental decline. We brought in Grandpa's doctor, who confirmed he was lucid at the time. Wayne lost everything and had to repay some funds he'd already transferred. And the judge made a rare order. Wayne had to write formal apology letters to every grandchild. Story 14. It was the reading of the will at the attorney's office. All the siblings were there. The executor, Cheryl, the eldest sister, brought the will in herself. It named only her as beneficiary. No one else. Her younger brother Darren turned beet red. "Mom said she updated it after the fight we had last year," he said. Cheryl scoffed. But the attorney paused. "That's strange," he said. "Because I have a second will on file, updated 3 months ago." The room went quiet. He opened the sealed envelope. The new will split everything among all 3 siblings. Darren and their younger sister looked stunned. Cheryl stood up and said, "That's not real." But it was signed, notarized, and properly filed. Turns out Cheryl had intercepted the mail at their mom's house and removed any correspondence from the law firm. She assumed no one would know. She was removed as executor on the spot. The lawyer reported her to the bar. No criminal charges, but she lost the house, her siblings, and her reputation. Story 15. The deceased was a well-known architect. His estate was massive. Real estate, intellectual property, investments. The executor? His old business partner, Glenn. Glenn claimed the final will was never completed and presented one from 10 years ago, which left Glenn with 80% of everything. My client was the architect's estranged daughter. She hadn't spoken to him in years, until 3 months before his death. They'd reconciled, and she suspected he changed the will afterward. No one could find it. But a week before trial, a paralegal from Glenn's own firm reached out anonymously. She sent us scanned documents with timestamps, a brand new will, leaving 60% to the daughter, 20% to Glenn, and the rest to charities. We subpoenaed Glenn's company email and confirmed it had been received by him weeks earlier. In court, the judge read aloud Glenn's response to the email. "Delete this. We go with the old one." Boom, the courtroom gasped. Glenn was sanctioned for fraud and permanently banned from any fiduciary duty. The daughter got everything her father intended, and Glenn lost more than money. He lost every client he had left. Story 16. The executor, Colleen, was the deceased's oldest child. She swooped in the day their father died, boxed up all his paperwork, and told the family she'd take care of everything. She showed up with a copy of a will from 2012, leaving everything to her. The siblings were shocked. Their dad had made it clear at dinner just months before he passed that they'd all be equally taken care of. My client, the youngest brother, hired me to challenge the validity. Colleen claimed there were no updates, no backups. But she'd made a fatal mistake. She'd forgotten the cloud. We found her father's iCloud account, which had been syncing files from his computer. A recent folder, backed up 3 weeks before his death, contained a scanned version of a new will. It evenly split the estate. Signed, witnessed, legitimate. In court, Colleen said she never saw it, but Apple's metadata said otherwise. She logged into the same account on her phone after his death. She deleted nothing. She just hoped no one would look. We did. Story 17. Sometimes justice comes in the form of an old fax machine. The executor was the deceased's nephew, Trevor. The will he provided left everything to himself, with a footnote that his uncle wanted no one else involved. No one questioned it at first, until the gardener spoke up. He remembered the old man spending a full afternoon at a nearby Staples, faxing documents and making copies. Curious, we got permission to contact the store. Bingo. The store had digital archives. One document, time-stamped and saved, was a will faxed from the location 2 weeks before the man died. It left the house and investments to a local environmental charity and 2 longtime employees. We subpoenaed Trevor's email. He'd received that fax the day it was sent, and ignored it. Claimed it was nonsense. The judge was furious. Trevor was fined for intentional concealment and removed as executor. The charity and workers cried in court. One of them said, "I trimmed that man's hedges for 22 years. He never forgot me. But his family did." Story 18. The will was written in pencil, on a napkin, or so the executor claimed. He was the deceased's drinking buddy, and he showed up at the probate hearing with a wrinkled napkin that said, "I leave all my stuff to Rick." No witnesses, no notary, nothing. I represented the deceased's daughter, a teacher who hadn't heard from her dad in over a year due to a falling out. Still, she remembered him talking about getting his stuff in order after a heart attack scare. We found his bank statements. One entry, a payment to a mobile notary service 6 months ago. I tracked down the notary. She still had the client record and confirmed she had notarized a proper will. The original had been sent to his home address, but it never surfaced. Under oath, Rick admitted he'd found some papers when cleaning up and might have tossed a few. Judge's face went blank. We presented the notary's affidavit and a backup digital copy of the will, naming the daughter as sole heir. Rick got nothing. Story 19. The executor, Carol, was the niece of a wealthy but reclusive woman who passed away in a nursing home. Carol insisted her aunt never updated her will and had no use for technology. She produced a will from 1999 naming herself the sole heir. But one nurse mentioned the woman had taken up internet classes late in life and spent hours at the facility computer. We got a court order to access the machine. With help from a digital forensic expert, we recovered a file, Will Final V2.x.x, dated 3 months before her death. The file detailed donations to women's shelters, scholarships, and named 4 other nieces and nephews, not just Carol. Carol claimed the file was never signed. Except it was. We found a signed printout in her aunt's personal safe, inside a labeled envelope, to be opened after my death. Carol had the key the entire time. The judge ordered immediate transfer of all assets per the new will. Carol turned red and left mid-hearing. One of the other beneficiaries whispered, "She always was a snake." Story 20. This one started with a recipe box. The deceased was a beloved aunt known for baking. The executor, her cousin, claimed there was no will and the estate should go to the next blood relative. That would be him. But my client, a former foster child the aunt had practically raised, remembered being told, "When the time comes, you'll know where to look." She tore through the house. Finally, in the back of the pantry, inside a worn-out recipe box, under the banana bread card, she found it, an envelope. Inside was a handwritten will, dated and signed, with 2 attached witness statements. It left everything to my client. The executor tried to claim it was a forgery, but one of the witnesses was still alive. He testified that the aunt made him and his wife sign it because that girl is the only one who ever truly cared. The judge not only admitted the will, but said the hiding place was So on brand, it might be more authentic than a notary seal. The cousin never showed up again? Story 21. The executor was a family friend named Jordan. The deceased, Mr. Langley, had no kids and appointed Jordan as executor 5 years ago. Jordan submitted a will from 2016 leaving him the entire estate, including a downtown apartment and several antique cars. My client was Mr. Langley's goddaughter. She wasn't expecting much, but she was sure he had recently changed his will, because he had her help revise it. She remembered them uploading the new version to Google Drive. Jordan insisted there was only ever one will. I filed a subpoena for the deceased's Google account, and there it was. A folder titled Final Will 2023. It was signed and witnessed digitally, as permitted by state law. The new will left most of the estate to educational charities and the goddaughter. Jordan's name didn't appear once. We confronted him in court. His response? I didn't think digital wills were real. The judge's response? They are. And so is fraud. Jordan was removed instantly. My client donated the first $50,000 from the estate to the school Mr. Langley once taught at. She cried when she handed them the check. Story 22. The executor, Carol, presented a typed-up will supposedly dictated by her grandmother during her final hours. It left everything to Carol and excluded all other relatives, 6 grandchildren in total. But Carol forgot that her grandmother had suffered a stroke a month earlier and lost her ability to speak. One of the excluded cousins, my client, worked in speech therapy. She asked, "Wait, how did Grandma dictate this?" We brought in medical records. Confirmed, the grandmother had aphasia. Couldn't form complete sentences, let alone recite a will. Carol's typed document had no witnesses, no dates, and no notary. It was dismissed immediately. Then we found something else. Tucked inside a photo album was the real will, handwritten a year prior with signatures from 2 neighbors. It left her estate equally to all 6 grandchildren and donated her jewelry to a local church. Carol admitted to finding it and hiding it in the attic because it was too chaotic. The judge ordered her disinherited and formally sanctioned. The church still uses her brooch as a decorative cross. Story 23. Roger was a beloved retired music teacher. The executor of his estate was his brother-in-law, Vic, who quickly submitted an old will from 2005, leaving everything to Vic's side of the family. My client was Roger's former student. They'd stayed in touch for over a decade. She said Roger told her multiple times he wanted to set up a scholarship fund and had already updated his will to reflect it. Vic laughed it off in court. Roger was a dreamer, not a planner. We asked for access to Roger's storage. Vic fought it, but the court approved it. Inside, we found a locked filing cabinet. The storage manager had a spare key. Inside, 3 labeled binders, and at the top, scholarship will, signed, witnessed by 2 former teachers with notarized statements and specific instructions for a $250,000 fund. When the judge asked Vic why he hadn't disclosed this, he said, "I thought it was just a draft." He was removed, replaced, and sued by the foundation we helped set up. He lost. So did his smug smile. Story 24. The executor was the deceased's stepdaughter, who had always claimed she was like a real daughter to him. She submitted a will that left her the entire house and savings account. But when my client, the man's actual biological son, showed up with a voicemail from 3 months prior, everything changed. In the message, the father said, "Hey, just letting you know the new will is signed and mailed to the lawyer. You and Sarah will split the estate. No one else." I wrote everything down. The voicemail alone wasn't enough. We contacted the lawyer he mentioned. The firm said they mailed the signed copy to the father's house, confirmed by USPS tracking. But the stepdaughter claimed it never arrived. Then we checked the father's email. A scanned copy had been sent to him and forwarded to the stepdaughter. She opened it 3 times. Metadata doesn't lie. When confronted in court, she claimed ignorance. But the lawyer's office had a second signed copy in their safe. Judge ruled immediately. The son whispered, "He always knew she was faking it." Story 25. In a bizarre case, the executor tried to use an AI-generated will. That's right. My client's aunt passed away suddenly, and her tech-obsessed nephew, Lucas, filed a will supposedly generated based on her preferences and past conversations using ChatGPT. He claimed she wanted everything to go to him and used her email records, texts, and even voice notes to generate it. Problem? The court doesn't recognize predictive AI wills, especially ones not signed, witnessed, or even printed. When asked for a physical copy, Lucas said, "It lives in the cloud." We subpoenaed her former estate attorney, who provided a signed, dated, and notarized will from the previous year, giving her estate to an LGBTQ plus arts foundation and her 3 nieces. Lucas was specifically excluded. In court, the judge stared at him and said, "This is not Black Mirror." Lucas left in silence. And yes, the AI-generated will was submitted into evidence. As a joke. Story 26. The executor was the deceased's second wife, Marlene. She showed up to the probate hearing with a crisp will from 2014, leaving everything to her. The kids from the first marriage were completely excluded. My client, the eldest son, calmly waited until she finished her speech. Then he handed the judge a crumpled envelope postmarked 3 months before his dad died. Inside, a handwritten letter addressed to him. "In case Marlene pulls anything, here's the real one. Signed it last month." Also inside, a signed, notarized will leaving the estate evenly to his 3 kids, with Marlene still receiving a pension and 1 vehicle. Marlene immediately said it was fake, but the notary, still in practice, testified under oath, recalling the man saying, "I just want my kids to know I never forgot them." The judge admitted the new will. Marlene stood up, screamed, and stormed out, slamming the courtroom doors behind her. She didn't even wait to hear the final ruling. Story 27. The deceased, Ruth, was a reclusive painter with no close family. The executor, her nephew Darren, submitted a typed will naming himself the sole heir to her estate, which included a lakeside cottage and dozens of valuable paintings. My client was Ruth's neighbor of 15 years. She'd taken Ruth to the hospital countless times and even helped her buy groceries. She believed Ruth had changed her will to include her. There were no leads, until we accessed Ruth's old answering machine. One saved message from Ruth to her attorney said, "Yes, I'm dropping off the new will Monday. It includes Madison and the gallery donation." We subpoenaed the loft. They never got the drop-off. But the security camera at the building entrance told a different story. Darren is clearly seen taking a thick envelope out of Ruth's mailbox and tossing it into his car. He didn't just hide it. He stole it. The judge called it blatant interference with the estate. The backup draft, signed and witnessed, was accepted. Madison got the cottage. The gallery got the paintings. Darren got a referral to the DA. Story 28. It was a corporate estate. The deceased had founded a small but successful furniture company. The executor, his business partner Randall, produced a will giving him full control. But one employee noticed something odd. The founder had made cryptic comments weeks before his death like, "You'll be fine. I fixed everything." My client, the founder's estranged daughter, believed he'd reconciled and changed his will. She just couldn't prove it. That's when the office's IT manager called me. Apparently, the founder had scheduled an email with Gmail's delayed send feature. 3 days after his death, the IT manager received it. "Randall can't be trusted. If anything happens to me, the new will is in the conference room ceiling tile, red folder." We retrieved it. Inside, a notarized will leaving 75% of the company to the daughter, 25% to a charity for disabled veterans, and Randall, nothing. In court, Randall's face was a painting of panic. The judge enforced the valid will and suggested Randall lawyer up. Story 29. The executor was the deceased's best friend, Tammy. She swore up and down that there was no will and that everything would go to the state. My client was the woman's godson, who had cared for her through her final months. He said she definitely had a will. He'd even helped her buy a fireproof lockbox for it. When we visited the home, the box was gone. Tammy claimed it had never existed. 2 weeks later, the landlord evicted Tammy from the property. The new tenant was cleaning out the shed when he found the lockbox, buried under insulation. Still sealed, still locked. The landlord called my client. Inside the box, the signed, notarized will, naming my client as sole heir, and a note that read, "Don't let Tammy near this." In court, Tammy faked tears and said, "I didn't know what it was." The judge ruled instantly. The will was executed. Tammy didn't even look back when she walked out, just muttered, "Whatever." Story 30. He was the executor and also the deceased's roommate. When his friend passed, he claimed the man had left him the condo and savings verbally. There was no written will, he said. That alone seemed odd. The deceased was a tax attorney. My client was the man's sister. She lived out of state and was shocked when the executor refused to let her into the apartment. "No will, no access," he said. I asked for time. Something didn't add up. We contacted the deceased's law school alumni group and asked if anyone had spoken to him recently. One classmate forwarded an email chain. In it, the man described his new will and attached the draft. He was leaving everything to his sister, his niece, and a scholarship fund. We searched his cloud account using legal channels and found the final signed version. uploaded to OneDrive. The metadata showed the executor had accessed it 4 days after the death and deleted it. Game over. The court accepted the OneDrive version. The executor lost the condo, and the niece now goes to college tuition-free. Story 31. The executor was the deceased's son-in-law, Dennis. He submitted a will dated 6 years prior, leaving everything to his wife, meaning Dennis and his kids got it all. But Dennis didn't expect the deceased's ex-wife, my client, to contest it. She didn't want the money. She just knew something was off. Her ex had remarried, yes, but after a major falling out with Dennis, he told her he'd updated everything. We had nothing until we dug into the home office trash. Literally. Taped to the bottom of a drawer was a torn envelope addressed to a law firm, half-burned. It had tracking information. We subpoenaed the law firm. They had a scanned copy of the signed will and a witness statement from 2 months before his death. The new will left the house to charity, his classic car to an old war buddy, and the remainder divided among grandkids. Dennis was nowhere in it. The judge not only revoked his executor role but referred him for investigation. His wife, furious, filed for divorce a month later. Story 32. Elaine, the executor, was the niece of a wealthy woman who died suddenly from a stroke. She presented a detailed will naming herself as the sole heir and caretaker of legacy. Problem? The woman had spent her final year living with my client, her goddaughter. She recalled helping the woman notarize a will just a few months prior. But Elaine claimed nothing newer exists. That's when the notary called me back. Not only did she remember the woman, she still had a scanned version in her database and an appointment record. The new will split the estate between several family members and left a generous donation to an animal shelter. Elaine got just a painting and a letter. We confronted Elaine in court. She stammered that the woman was confused and didn't mean it. But the will had video confirmation. The notary had recorded a consent video due to the woman's age. In it, she clearly says, "Elaine doesn't need my money. She needs humility." It was game over. Story 33. Harold was appointed executor after his wealthy cousin died in a boating accident. He claimed no will existed, so by default the estate passed to Harold as the only living relative. But I represented the deceased's business partner. He swore that a new will existed, naming him partial heir to a beachfront property they'd co-owned. Harold insisted it was all hearsay. We filed to delay distribution and began digging. Turns out the deceased had been part of a local yacht club. I contacted their admin, who casually mentioned, "He came in here one day waving a will around saying he finally cut Harold out." Boom. She still had a copy. The man had printed it at their office, signed it in front of 2 members, and left a duplicate in their locker system. We opened the locker and found the sealed envelope. My real will. It left half the estate to the partner and the other half to a marine preservation trust. Harold got a fishing rod. The judge didn't even need a recess. The will was real. Harold was livid. Story 34. Sometimes karma uses receipts. The executor, Brenda, claimed the deceased, her elderly neighbor, left her everything verbally before passing. The man had no immediate family, so no one disputed it at first. But Brenda got greedy. She immediately began selling his things, including vintage guitars that had belonged to his late son. My client was a friend of the deceased who lived overseas. When he learned of the death, he was shocked Brenda never notified him, despite being listed as the emergency contact. We asked for access to the man's email. Brenda refused, but we contacted the email provider and recovered the account through legal channels. Inside the inbox was a receipt, $79 for Willmaker Pro software. We found the file, exported, named mywillfinal.pdf. It was signed, printed, and dated 6 weeks before death, naming 3 beneficiaries, including my client. Brenda had seen the email and ignored it. In court, she said she didn't recognize the software. The judge recognized fraud. My client got the guitars. Brenda got nothing. Story 35. The executor was the man's sister, Kelly. The will she presented left her the house and savings and made no mention of his longtime partner, David, who had lived with him for 12 years. David was devastated. He said the man had promised to secure his future, but the will was dated before their relationship began. Then David remembered something, a locked drawer the man always kept sealed. After getting access to the apartment, we found it, and inside, a USB drive. On the drive was a video. In it, the deceased reads his updated will out loud on camera, date-stamped, with 2 neighbors in the background. Then he signs it. He explains that the physical copy is filed with the firm downtown. We contacted the firm. They had it. The signed witnessed will gave David lifetime rights to the apartment, full access to a joint account, and named Kelly as guardian of the man's cats. Only. When the judge played the video in court, Kelly froze. The ruling was swift. David burst into tears. Story 36. The executor was the deceased's youngest brother, Dale. The will he presented was old, almost 20 years. It left him the family farm and the savings account. No mention of the deceased's adult daughter from a previous relationship. My client was that daughter, Emily. She had been reconnected with her dad for the past 5 years and swore he'd promised her the house they'd fixed up together. Dale said, he never updated anything. I asked him a dozen times, but Emily had a screenshot. She'd helped her dad write a rough draft of his will on her laptop. She still had the file in her Dropbox. At the end, he had written, I want Emily to have the house. She's the only person who truly came back for me. It wasn't a signed will, but it led us somewhere. The name of a local lawyer scribbled in the corner of the file. We contacted him. He confirmed everything. The deceased had finalized a new will the month before he passed. Dale had known about it. He was even CC'd in one of the emails. The judge was furious. Dale was removed and fined. Emily now owns the house she rebuilt with her father, brick by brick. Story 37. The executor, Cheryl, was the best friend of a woman who died from ALS. She claimed there was no will because her friend had become too sick to complete it. The estate defaulted to her as next of kin. But I represented the woman's caregiver, who had been with her daily for 3 years. She swore the woman had a will, and she helped her finalize it during a lucid period weeks before her death. Cheryl said, impossible. She couldn't move or speak clearly. That's when the caregiver brought me a flash drive. It had a video, filmed with the woman blinking in response to a letterboard, spelling out every item of her last wishes. A notary was present. The whole process had been recorded and logged, legal in our state under extraordinary circumstances. The final will was on file with a local hospice care attorney. The video was played in court. Cheryl turned white. The woman had left her nothing. Everything was split between a scholarship fund and the caregiver. The judge said, this woman had more clarity than anyone else in this room. Cheryl didn't say a word leaving court. Story 38. Frank, the executor, was the cousin of a wealthy retiree who had passed away suddenly. Frank submitted a bare bones, typed will naming himself the sole heir, claiming the man had no real attachments. What he didn't know? My client, Ethan, had been in a civil union with the deceased years earlier, one that was never legally dissolved. When Frank was asked on record if the deceased had any long-term partners or spouses, he said, absolutely not. He died alone. But Ethan had paperwork and love letters, and, most importantly, a video message from the deceased recorded during COVID lockdown. I've rewritten everything. Frank will fight it. But I'm giving it all to Ethan. The new will was in the safety deposit box, one Ethan had legal access to, thanks to a co-ownership form. We opened it. Inside was the will, plus a copy mailed to a charity the deceased supported. The court honored the new will. Frank was found in contempt for lying under oath. Ethan got the house and closure. Story 39. Cynthia, the executor, was the deceased's co-worker and claimed to be his only real friend. She brought a handwritten note to probate court saying, to Cynthia goes my condo and savings. No one else helped me. Signed, Mark. The note was undated. No witnesses, no notary. But Cynthia pushed hard to validate it. My client, Mark's estranged sister, wasn't even looking for money. She just wanted to verify whether this was really what he wanted. Mark had a therapist. We subpoenaed session records. He had discussed his will openly, saying, I'm leaving something for Cynthia, but I'm making sure my sister is taken care of too. I already filed the documents. We contacted his bank's legal department. It took 2 weeks, but they finally located a will notarized in their branch. Done quietly, 4 months before he died. The real will left Cynthia the car and $10,000. The condo and the rest of the estate went to the sister. Cynthia was stunned. She asked if she could still get the car. The judge said, yes, but you'll need to return the key. Story 40. The executor, Billy, was a family friend who'd moved in with the deceased during his final year of life. He presented a will signed weeks before the man's death, naming himself the sole heir to his estate, worth $700,000. But the signature looked strange. My client, the man's niece, said it looked rushed, and unlike any document she'd seen her uncle sign. We brought in a handwriting expert. The signature didn't match, but we needed more. Then came the mail. The niece received a delayed letter, postmarked the day before her uncle passed. It said, Dear Maggie, I just wanted you to know I updated everything. "You'll be okay. Check the box under the tools in the shed." We went back to the house. Under the tools, a sealed FedEx envelope. Inside, a new will, properly signed and witnessed. It named Maggie and 2 local charities as beneficiaries. Billy's will? Forged. The witnesses he listed were his friends. Both later admitted they never saw the man sign anything. The court issued a fraud ruling. Billy left the courthouse with nothing but a lawyer's bill and a lifetime ban from serving as executor ever again. Story 41. The executor, Troy, was the deceased's nephew and part-time caregiver. He presented a will stating he would inherit everything due to his sacrifices, which conveniently excluded the man's only child, Rebecca. Rebecca, my client, was devastated. She hadn't been cut off. In fact, she had text messages from her dad, dated just a month before he passed, saying, "New will finally done. I left something for Troy, but you get the house as promised." Troy insisted no such document existed. We pulled cell phone records and found that Rebecca's father had called a mobile notary 2 weeks before his death. The notary kept records and confirmed the appointment. And yes, a new will had been signed in front of him in the living room. Troy claimed he must have thrown it out. Wrong. The notary had scanned a backup. In it, the house was left to Rebecca, and Troy was left with a modest savings account and a note, "For your help, but not for your lies." The judge didn't even let Troy finish his rebuttal. Rebecca got the house. Troy got escorted out when he started yelling. Story 42. The executor, Marta, was the deceased's younger sister. She filed an outdated will naming herself as sole beneficiary. The will was legit, signed, notarized, clear. But it was also 6 years old. My client, a lifelong friend of the deceased, said he had rewritten the will last year after reconciling with his estranged son. Marta said, "He never mentioned that to me once. We got lucky." The deceased had left a review on a local estate lawyer's Google page saying, "Very thorough. Helped me set things right for my son." We tracked down the attorney, who confirmed there was a new will, but claimed Marta had come to collect it. Then said it was a mistake and left. Turns out she'd taken the original and never mentioned it again. Thankfully, the lawyer had a scanned copy on file. The will gave the house to the son and a portion of the savings to my client. Marta's name? Completely missing. The judge reviewed both wills and called Marta's actions willful suppression. She was barred from inheritance. The son sobbed in court. My client hugged him. Story 43. The deceased, a widower with no children, left everything to his closest friends. Or so he thought. The executor, a former co-worker named Cliff, claimed the man changed his mind at the last minute and handwrote a new will naming Cliff the sole heir. It looked suspicious. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, and undated. Cliff's justification. He was dying, but clear. One of the friends came to me with something better, a Dropbox login. Inside the folder, a scanned and signed PDF labeled Final Will, Do Not Trust Cliff.pdf. It named 6 beneficiaries, all longtime friends. It was dated 3 days after the shaky handwritten version. Cliff had full access to the Dropbox and had deleted the file, but not from the cloud trash folder. We presented it in court, along with metadata and login records. When the judge read the file name aloud, even the clerk chuckled. The will was accepted. Cliff's inheritance was revoked. He was never seen at another friend gathering again. Story 44. Janine was the executor of her uncle's estate and had always been seen as the favorite niece. When he passed, she produced a will giving her full control of the estate and all assets. But my client, her cousin Leo, noticed something odd. The will was dated only 1 day before the death, and their uncle had been in a hospital on morphine. Janine said he was lucid that morning, but medical staff testified otherwise. The doctor said he was barely responsive and could not sign legal documents that day. Leo remembered the uncle kept a metal fireproof box hidden behind a false panel in his bedroom. With court permission, we opened it. Inside was the real will, dated 6 months earlier, signed, notarized, and witnessed. It split the estate evenly between all 4 nieces and nephews, with Janine getting nothing more than a commemorative watch. Janine's version was ruled invalid due to medical incapacity and forgery suspicion. The judge said, "Favoritism doesn't mean theft." Story 45. This one unraveled because of a dog. The executor, Paul, was the deceased's cousin. He presented a will leaving himself everything, including the house, car, and remaining cash. But when my client, the deceased's longtime neighbor, visited the house to check on the man's dog, which he had promised to adopt, she noticed the dog's collar tag had a QR code. She scanned it. The code led to a Google Drive folder labeled If I Die. Inside, a video message, a scanned will, and instructions for who should adopt the dog, who gets what assets, and a list of people to thank. The video ended with, "And if Paul's the one reading this, you know damn well this isn't you." We submitted the drive to court, verified it with timestamps, IP records, and even a notarized witness letter from a coworker. Paul looked stunned. The judge called it the most digitally modern estate I've ever seen. My client got the dog and a portion of the estate. Paul got digital shame and a criminal referral. Story 46. The executor was the deceased's cousin, Lydia. She brought forward a very basic will, stating that all assets go to Lydia for managing my care. That included a lake house, a boat, and a sizable savings account. My client, the deceased's godson Marcus, had lived with her for the last 2 years of her life, caring for her through multiple surgeries. He was shocked to find she'd left him nothing. He was sure there was a newer will. Lydia claimed there was no update, but a nurse at the hospital remembered seeing a woman sign something very official looking the day she was discharged. We tracked down the mobile notary who had been there that day. He had a digital log. And yes, the deceased had signed a new will in his presence. He'd even emailed a backup to her lawyer. But Lydia had intercepted her aunt's email account and deleted the incoming message. Unfortunately for her, the lawyer still had the original copy. In court, Lydia sat silently as the judge reinstated the new will, giving Marcus the lake house and splitting the rest among a cancer charity and a friend. Lydia didn't just lose the estate, she lost the only family she had left. Story 47. The executor, Steve, was the deceased's stepson. He claimed that after his stepfather died, he found an unsigned draft of a will on the desk and just followed the spirit of it. The unsigned draft gave Steve the entirety of the estate. When pressed in court, Steve admitted there had been a previous will, but he couldn't find it. Convenient. But my client, the deceased's brother, remembered something important. The stepfather was old school. He handwrote everything, and he made 3 carbon copies of his will and stored them in different places. We found one inside the back cover of a photo album in his garage, with his signature and the date in blue ink. We verified it through handwriting analysis and tracked down one of the 2 witnesses, his neighbor, who confirmed she saw him sign it. The will split everything between his brother, a local animal rescue, and a scholarship fund. Steve wasn't even mentioned. When the judge asked why Steve hadn't disclosed it, he said, "It was old. I thought it didn't matter any." The court disagreed. So did the IRS, after Steve had already started liquidating assets.